I'm joined today by Lawrence Norden, who is Deputy Director of the Democracy Program at NYU Law School's Brennan Center for Justice. There's a new study from the Brennan Center for Justice on American voting machines. And yet again, Lawrence, warnings as to why we need to be really concerned about the current electronic voting machines that are out there. For people who may not know, let's start at the most basic. How many different types of electronic voting machines are being used across the country right now?
Well, the answer is probably dozens. They fall into two main categories, though. One are what are called direct recording electronic machines, and these are touchscreen machines some people may be familiar with. Most of them date back to technology from the 1990s, so they're not the kind of like iPads that we might be familiar with today. They're similar to kind of an ATM machine. And those are where you vote directly on the screen in terms of choosing candidates. Um, Slightly more common are what are known as optical scan machines. These are machines that read ballots that voters fill out. So you fill out a ballot, you fill in the bubbles the way you would any kind of like Scantron standardized test, or other kinds of paper uh, documents that people fill out. And then the machine reads that ballot. It's scanned. It may have some messages on it for the voter to tell them how they voted. But that's also a kind of computer that reads the votes.
And what are the concerns with each of the two types similar, or are they different concerns?
There are certainly different concerns in that the technology is a little bit different. So when optical scan machines fail, you still have a paper ballot, and if there are good procedures in place, even if the machine isn't working, people can still vote. That might create some slightly longer lines, but you're not going to be turning people away while you're trying to fix the machines. For DREs, direct recording electronic machines, if the machine isn't working, you're going to need to come up with an alternative way for people to vote. Hopefully, there'll be some paper ballots available at the polling place for people to vote on while those machines are being fixed. But both of these sets of machines, for the most part, around the country, were purchased soon after the 2000 election. A lot of people remember that was kind of a disaster of an election at the presidential level.
Yeah.
The country decided that we needed to replace punch card machines, which were used at the time, and lever machines to a lesser extent. And both sets of machines are essentially computers. They were mostly taken from designs in the late 90s. They use laptop technology, and in both cases, most of the machines that are in the U.S. today are over 10 or even 15 years old. And if you think about, if you bought a laptop in 2003 or 2004, you probably wouldn't expect it to be working particularly well today. And there's obviously been maintenance done on these machines, but they're across the board. Whatever machine is being used, for the most part, they're getting dangerously close to the end of their lifespans if they haven't already kind of passed what their projected lifespans are.
Every presidential election, every major election cycle, you hear and read about all of the thousands and thousands of reports of problems with different types of voting machines. And, in my mind, I would love to imagine that, after the election's done, all of these reports are looked at very closely and every machine involved is analyzed and repaired, and we're really well prepared for next time. And this time everything's going to go smoothly. Is that a total fantasy? Like, what actually happens in the period between elections with these machines?
It depends. So, what you're describing, I can say that there are. One thing to remember about American elections is they're incredibly decentralized. So, you really, for the most part, they're being run at the county and sometimes even at the town level. So, there are counties that we spoke to in putting together this report where they actually are very on top of things, and particularly where the machines are older, they're looking at the kinds of problems that they have after each election, trying to diagnose them and figure out what needs to be done to maintain and repair them. But I would say probably for the most part that's not true, and certainly there needs to be more sharing of information. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that we've seen with the DRE machines that has happened in some places is, and this might sound kind of hard to believe, but the glue between, and this just happens with age, the glue between the screen and the machine has started to degrade. And that can create all kinds of problems. People, in particular, a big problem that happens is that there's what's called vote flipping. People intend to vote for, let's say, Barack Obama, and Mitt Romney shows up on the screen.
Which specifically famously happened. There's that video from Pennsylvania, I believe it was, where that took place.
It's happened. It's happened in many places, and it's going to happen more often as these machines age. Um, it may start happening first in one county in Pennsylvania, but a county in Alabama or Arizona may be using those machines too, and maybe they got them a year or two later. They need to be made aware that these kinds of things are going to start happening more often, even if they haven't happened yet in those places. So that kind of information sharing, I would say, unfortunately, doesn't happen nearly as much as it should.
So 2016 is coming up. You mentioned generally that every election the machines are older. So obviously
Mm-hmm.
that with every successive election cycle that can become more of an acute problem. Is there
Yes.
anything specific other than just the general aging of the machines that you're looking at now for 2016?
Well, I think the big thing that it's too late, frankly, for most places to replace their equipment. So the
Okay, that
big
was
thing
going to
that
be the next question, which is whether it's even an academic issue at this point or a realistic one.
it is, I mean, look, some places are planning to replace their machines for 2016, but those plans were well underway. You know, you don't. It's not a good idea in general to kind of rush into purchasing new equipment and try to implement it before the biggest election that occurs every 4 years. So a few places, Maryland is going to be replacing machines for 2016. Some other smaller jurisdictions, the state of Michigan may be replacing some of them in many places. But for the most part, we're not going to see new machines. So then the question is, what can be done to minimize problems? In 2012, according to a study from MIT and Harvard, between 500 and 700,000 votes were lost because of long lines. Some of that is related to machines failing on election day. So my biggest concern is making sure that jurisdictions are aware of the kinds of problems that can occur as these machines age, and they have plans in place for dealing with them to minimize the problems, because they're going to happen. And as you said, the machines are now 4 years older than they were in 2012. So we're going to see more of this.
Last thing I want to touch on, if you search on YouTube, for example, you'll find all sorts of videos purporting to be very grounded explanations or demonstrations of how easy it is to hack electronic voting machines. Talk a little bit about that. Is that really a fear? The idea that a county employee, for example, could just go in and delete the real number of votes for a particular candidate and put in whatever number they want? How realistic is that, and how likely is it someone, if they tried to do it, could actually get away with it?
Well, in some sense, there's truth in that. All of these systems run on software. You can manipulate software if you have access to machines. I think the good news is that most voting systems in the United States today have a paper record of how the voter voted. They can be used to check whatever results the software is telling you are the results. And a lot of places now do conduct those audits. I do think that there are, and I'm not alone in thinking this. I think most people think this. With the older machines, there are greater security risks. So we saw in Virginia, there was a state investigation done into a certain kind of machine that was used. It was an older machine. It had a wireless capabilities on the machine. It was used in about 24% of the precincts in the state. They found that somebody could, using an iPhone, could hack into machines, change vote totals. They decertified those machines. There are machines that are running on Windows 2000, Windows XP, which aren't serviced anymore. There are no security patches for those systems. Those probably have more security vulnerabilities. That doesn't mean that those systems are going to be manipulated. Again, there are lots of checks that we can do to make sure that the machines are giving us accurate tallies, particularly when there's a paper record of the vote. You know, the older these machines get, the more likely you're going to have problems. And anything that can be done, you know, anything that's a security risk in terms of malicious behavior is also a risk for just failures. So I would say the big thing is, number one, make sure that we have all the proper procedures in place to be checking that these totals are accurate, for whether it's for an accidental failure or some kind of malicious behavior. And secondly, eventually, we just need to replace these systems.
Well, we're going to continue covering it. You know that the Brennan Center for Justice will also continue covering it. We've been speaking with Lawrence Norden, who's the Deputy Director of the Democracy Program at NYU Law School's Brennan Center for Justice. Thanks so much for talking to us about this.
Thank you for having me on.